Thank you very much, Evans, for that wonderful introduction, and I appreciate it. And even more than the introduction that Evans just gave, I appreciated his phone call last night. Because last night he phoned me and said, you know, I'm introducing you tomorrow, and I need some points to take and provide for interview. I'll just move that so it doesn't sound like I'm spitting at you. He said, I need some points to introduce you. I said, really, for what? And he said, well, you're doing the talk tomorrow. Really? Good to know. And in all honesty, I am certain that Justin and others had informed me that I was doing a classification talk today. I have no doubt that I was informed, but like so many other things in life, I heard it, and did I bother to take note of it? Not really. So Evans, thank you very much for the introduction and for the heads up that I was talking today. So last night I did a little bit of preparation for that. Again, thank you to Evans. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake LaBarge. I cremated Sam McGee. Now, Sam McGee was from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and grows. And I'm going to stop there. That's from our wonderful Yukon ballad, Robert Service. And why that poem, and why the marge on Lake LaBarge, and what the heck is a marge anyway? Well, setting aside human relations about what a marge might be, it would be an appropriate name for a person. A marge is like a flat at the end of a lake. And so the marge at Lake LaBarge is actually on Shallow Bay Road. And I had a cabin with 12 acres on the marge at Lake LaBarge. And I had some great friends that lived just down the road from me, Tim and Stella. And Tim and Stella had a reindeer farm. And it was absolutely fabulous. They had 300, 400 different reindeer. And they were very strapped, though, as most farmers are, or ranchers in this case, in that they loved to be able to get some time away, but they weren't able to do that. I mean, who do you know that's like, oh, you know what, as a sideline, I just look after reindeer, I'll just pop over and do that for you. Well, as it turned out, yours truly got the knock one day from Tim and said, Tony, would you mind coming and seeing if Zill will let you in to the reindeer pen, because we'd love it if you could kind of help us out a little bit with it. And so my first question is, Zill, who's Zill? Zill is an Anatolian German Shepherd. Now, I don't know if any of you have seen an Anatolian German Shepherd, but you think of a German Shepherd and then multiply it by 3 and make it God's honest truth, and make it very aggressive, and then you have an Anatolian German Shepherd. There were 3 people that Zill would allow in the reindeer pen: Tim, Stella, and me. And that was it. Nobody else was allowed to come in. Now, Zill's job was to look after those 300 to 400 reindeer and make sure that there was, no predators coming in. And we actually saw him one day go after a grizzly. And he put the run on a grizzly. So that'll give you the idea of the size of the dog. So Tim and Stella, they did the training that they wanted to do, that they needed to do, so I could look after the reindeer. And just for some odd reason, every time they picked to go away for that 6 weeks, it was always the middle of the winter. Now, I couldn't figure, why would you choose the winter to leave the Yukon? It's minus 50, minus 60. It's a beautiful time to hang around. But they would go, and for sure enough, for that, for that month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it was over the time, I would look after the reindeer. And minus 50 and minus 60, we're talking Fahrenheit here. I'm going to show my age, and we're talking Fahrenheit. So minus 50 and minus 60, that's cold, but that's not the coldest. That's not the coldest. The coldest winter I ever spent was working in an open pit asbestos mine 90 miles north of Dawson City, Yukon. And it was Clinton Creek was the name of the mine. We had the longest fiber in the world, 2.5 inches long. So it was asbestos that you could weave into cloth, and it was wonderful experience. Lots of health hazards and such, but I took all of the appropriate precautions, which was a good thing when I'm talking about my career later. But it took all of the appropriate precautions. Now, winter 75, it's a nice sequence of numbers. The winter 75, I'm working in the pit, outside, 12-hour shifts. It is 76 degrees below zero. With a wind chill, it is 126 degrees below zero. That's cold. That's cold. That's the coldest I've ever been, and you're working outside. And without any stretch of imagination or any stretch of the truth, you had to wear a hard hat. You could take your hard hat off, hold it out at shoulder length, and let it go, and it was so cold that it would shatter when it hit the ground. Now, you still wore it, but that was the effectiveness. That's what that kind of temperature is. As you go north, I'm sure some of you are aware, the farther north you go, the bigger the ravens get. So by the time you're 90 miles north of Dawson City, Yukon, the ravens are big. They're almost twice the size of the ravens that you see in the Kelowna area here. That is the only time I've ever seen ravens just land and die. It was that cold. Our haul trucks in the pit had 16-cylinder Detroit diesel engines in them. Now, the idle speed for a diesel, as anybody with a pickup would probably know, is between 600 and 750 RPM. And you've got regular coolant running through that. With the Detroit diesel engines in the haul trucks, we had the coolant cut 50% with kerosene. We had the idles up to 1100 RPM. And with that engine running at 1100 RPM and 50% kerosene in the coolant, the heads would freeze while the engine was running. So that kind of cold temperature, those degrees, what sane person would say, you know what, I need to change the degrees. And so that led me into deciding that was enough of mining and go and get a few higher education kinds of degrees that would suit me better than 76 below. I was born in the Yukon, so it wasn't like that was an anomaly to me, but that was enough of that. So, as I said, something a little different, getting some degrees in there, and getting a job that didn't require me to stand in an open pit, asbestos mine at those kinds of temperatures. So I did that. I started a career with the government of Yukon. I was with the government of Yukon for almost 24 years. The first 11 years of that, I was Director of Corrections and Law Enforcement. And in that position, the various areas that fell under my responsibility were probation, parole, so both probation is a provincial responsibility, parole is a federal responsibility, but in the Yukon, I carried both of those. Crime prevention, family violence prevention and education, corrections, so jails, and the RCMP. So covering all of those, I thoroughly enjoyed my 11 years as Director of Corrections and Law Enforcement and really made some great connections, even in corrections, but not with the inmates, but with some of the people outside of that, although some of the inmates were outstanding people. I almost segued into what's going on south of the border, but I won't. I'll just leave that. Felons are felons, right? So at any rate, I developed some great relationships there, in particular with some great RCMP superintendents and chief superintendents, which I cherish to this day and came in very handy years later, and I'll get to that. When I was working in the Department of Justice, another department, Crown Corporation in the Government of Yukon, was Workers' Compensation, Occupational Health and Safety. And it was in a terrible state of affairs. There was a fellow there, Ron, I won't go disclose the full name, it's a public record, but nonetheless, Ron was the president and CEO and deputy minister. And workers' comp at that point had a 50% turnover in staff annually, which is very high. Employers did not like workers' comp. And when I'm saying workers' comp, you can read workers' compensation, occupational health and safety. It's a lot to say. So employers were not happy with workers' comp, and injured workers and workers in general were not happy with workers' comp. So Deputy Minister of Justice asked if I would consider, on behalf of the Premier, going over to WCB and helping them kind of get things straightened out. And I agreed to take and do it. So I showed up my first day at workers' comp as Vice President of Corporate Services, and Ron came into my office. He says, Tony, there's a number of things that we're wrestling with. One of them is that we've got these 17 board orders that haven't been enacted. They haven't, they're signed off, but we haven't enacted them. So if anybody's familiar with or not familiar with legislation, a board order is an extension of a piece of legislation. It's law. So they had 17 pieces of law sitting on the desk that nothing had happened with. And Ron said, can you help us with that? Well, fortunately, coming from Department of Justice, Corrections and Law Enforcement, I had a connection or two. So I said, absolutely. Took the 17 board orders, and by the end of the next day, those board orders were all enacted. That was sort of the kickoff start. Now, in the flow of that first few months as Vice President of Corporate Services, as I said, workers and employers were not happy with workers' compensation. And they ended up calling for a public inquiry. And Sheila Copps was Auditor General of Canada at the time, and she agreed to do a public inquiry on the state of workers' compensation and occupational health and safety in Canada. I remember her two assistant auditors that would come to Whitehorse quite regularly and do the interviews. And as we moved through, I'll back up. When that public inquiry started, Ron came into my office and he said, Tony, I've enjoyed the job, but I'm not the guy to lead the organization through a public inquiry. And I think in the back of his mind, he had it that he felt that he was partly going to be called out in the results of the public inquiry, so he chose to leave. And the board and the Premier asked if I would take over the role of President, CEO, and Deputy Minister, and I did. So as we're going along, Sheila Copps and her two assistant auditors are in Yukon, and they're doing all of the work that they need to do. And as we're moving along, we built a rather good relationship. And I asked Sheila, I said, we haven't done this in Canada yet, but is it possible that when you publish your findings of the public inquiry, is it possible for me and my organization to publish our response simultaneously? And Sheila wasn't too sure that was going to be acceptable. Was there going to be political interference and all those kinds of concerns? And as it turned out, she agreed. We had some great conversations, and she agreed to take and do that. And so she published her findings, we published our results, and it went swimmingly well. It was very good. One of the things that I committed to, and I had brought 5 pages of notes, and I haven't glanced down once at them actually, so hopefully I'm on track here. But you won't know if I'm not, so just saying. So at any rate, one of the things that I committed to do is we clearly need to overhaul workers' compensation, occupational health and safety in the Yukon. And I had the good fortune of connecting with a fellow by the name of Jim McKinley. Now, Jim McKinley lived in Cochrane, Alberta at the time, and has since, years ago, he's passed away. But Jim McKinley was one of the fellows that was called into South Africa to work with Nelson Mandela on the whole repatriation in South Africa. And so it was wonderful to be able to work with this guy and learn about corporate organizations, corporate culture. I mean, if you can talk about reconciliation in South Africa and bring that country together, you know a thing or two about culture, and you know a thing or two about listening to different perspectives in culture, and how do you bring those forward and how do you support those. So I'm very grateful for the work that I did with Jim McKinley. We turned workers' comp, to cut to the chase, we turned workers' comp around. When I retired from government, if you wanted to go to work at workers' comp, it was going to take you probably 18 months to 2 years to get a job there, because there were a waiting list of people that wanted to go to work there. Workers' compensation in the Yukon was the highest funded board, just shy of $1 billion in reserves, and had the greatest occupational health and safety record in all of Canada. And that was from addressing the cultural issues that were within the organization and making sure that we were providing the kind of service that government is meant to provide. The active word there is meant to provide. I'm not saying it does provide, but that's what turned workers' comp around in the Yukon, was that we were clearly able to address the needs for workers, address the needs for employers, and address the needs for injured workers, and make sure we were hitting the mark for all three, and that we enhanced communication across all three as well. It proved to be a really magic combination, and something that I'm very proud of even to this day. Now, moving on from that, there does come a time where, and there's lots of great stories to tell about that, but today's not the time, and you may not be interested. I'm realistic enough to know that that might be more than you'd like to hear. But nonetheless, there comes a time to move on. And what had kept me sane and healthy through the stress of public inquiries and being a CEO, president, and deputy minister for 12 years was physical fitness. I made it very much, to my associate at the back table, very much a responsibility and a habit of mine to go to the gym every day. And I did go to the gym every day. And it was a religion to me. It became a habit to me that at noon, didn't matter what was happening, I went to the gym and I did my workout. In the evenings, I took and started studying martial arts, and it was Taekwondo. And between the two, I absolutely loved that. I became a black belt, and then a second degree, then a third degree, then a fourth degree black belt in Taekwondo. Ended up running the Taekwondo school in the Yukon. And for a number of years later, living in Kelowna, still ran that school. And my youngest son, Kagan, took over. He was a third Dan black belt, and so he took over the school and ran it while I was down here. So as I said, time for a change. Came down here and bought a gym that was not doing well. And I thought, well, you know, if I can turn a government department around, I can probably turn a gym around. And so we did that. It was a small gym, which we almost tripled in size, and sold it 5 years later as a very successful going concern. And it allowed me to continue with my real passion around physical fitness and just being physically active. And when we think of physical fitness, whether it's a martial art or whether it's you're on your road bike or you're on a street bike or whatever it is you do for physical fitness for absolutely everybody drives a couple of things, right? First, it drives you just feeling better about yourself. But you know what? It also drives your cognitive ability. It drives what happens between here. And doing physical fitness that puts muscle on also drives your immune system. So it's not a, gee, I wish I had time, or gosh, if I wasn't so busy, I would. No. I'm just saying you want to make a habit of your physical fitness. You know, when you're looking after yourself as one of the, I'm not saying you've got to make it the most important priority, because somebody might debate what that needs to be, but it does need to be an important priority. Look after yourself, and part of looking after yourself is eat well and be physically active, because it will keep you mentally active and it will keep you healthy. So I learned that, and I learned that actually a hard way and a functional way as well. So the hard way was actually having a heart attack while being a deputy minister, and being on the cardiac ward in Whitehorse General Hospital, and my doctor, GP, coming into my room and giving me a rather stern talking about physical fitness, and I was fit, but she wanted me to leave the job. And so we had a couple of really great conversations, and it was her saying, well, either you retire or I'll retire you as my patient. So Lise Densmore, my hat's off. Lise has passed away, skiing accident, and but my hat's off to Liz for being so blunt with me and being so forthright. That was it was a life-changing thing for me. And physical fitness has continued to be important, not only the heart attack, but in the Justin, give me this when I've got 10 minutes, okay? Okay. But not only having the heart attack, but also having had a stroke. I was born with a bicuspid heart valve, the aortic valve, so that's the valve at the top of the heart. Had open heart surgery 14 years ago and had that replaced. And they gave it a 10-year lifespan for that valve to function. And I maintained and still maintain my physical fitness today. And about 14, 15 months ago, that valve failed. And so I was back into the hospital and we did what's called a TAVI procedure. So instead of having to do open heart surgery, they were able to go in through the groin and they were able to put another valve inside the valve that I've got. And so we're tickety-boo. It took me about 6-7 weeks to recover from that and to get right back in the saddle for the physical fitness. And I'll just kind of went way off track on my notes. I should have been looking at my notes here. But at any rate, having had that career in government of Yukon, knowing about corporate culture, and prior to that, being director of corrections and law enforcement, as I said earlier, gave me some great connections with the RCMP at the superintendent level and chief superintendent level. And that paid off and this would be a little bit for Tosca there, that paid off in the sense that the Mark Anthony Group actually approached and asked me to come in as their head of security. Now, Mark Anthony Group, for anybody that doesn't know, well, who are they? Think first and foremost Mike's Hard Lemonade. That's who put them on the map. But think Mission Hill, think Cedar Creek, think Martin's Lane, and many other wineries. And so I headed security for the group for 10 years and thoroughly enjoyed that. It was a wonderful career to have in addition to the other things that I had done. And I got to meet and spend time with some really amazing people, and it's a long list of amazing people. Some of those amazing people, though, that I got to actually spend time with was Prince Edward and Sophie. When they were in the Yukon, I was responsible for their security, along with the RCMP. And I got to spend some time with them, and they're wonderful people. And also, I was responsible for the security for, along with the RCMP again, Kate and William. And I had the privilege of having a private audience with Kate and William, which was a very meaningful 30 minutes for me. And for anybody that follows any social media about Kate and William and the impression that they are amazing people, it's very true. It's very true. When you meet both of them, it's in many ways like our dear member Gordy. I don't see where Gordy's sitting right now. Or maybe he left. Okay, but he, very much like Gordy. You know, when Gordy comes and he puts his hand on your shoulder, you feel the care and you feel the warmth and you feel the connection. And Kate and William are like that. Both of them are like that as well. Wonderful people, wonderful people. Some of the other people that I got to tour around as a result of that job, Pink Martini, which was a lot of fun. Tom Cochran and his wife, which was just a real gas. And Tom Cochran's never not on stage, just if anybody wants to know. Life is a highway, definitely. Every day with Tom Cochran, his life is a highway. And I had a great time with them. The little story I want to tell, though, about one person that I toured around for a few days, without being specific how many days, was Tony Bennett. And Tony Bennett was 80 at the time. And he'd done a couple of performances at Mission Hill, and the audience, of course, loved Tony Bennett. And I just suggested, I said, you know, Tony, we could tour around the Okanagan a little bit. And his wife was all for it. And Tony wasn't so sure, you know. He said, well, you know, I'm going to get hassled, and there's going to be problems and such. And I said, no. That's okay. So the vehicle we're going to drive is not going to have any ID on it, but you just trust me. We're Canadians here. It'll all be good. So, okay. So I pull up to the location that we have that type of VIP guest stay in, and his wife came out, and she was dressed very nicely, and then Tony came out. Now, you've probably all at one point or another seen a picture of Tony Bennett. At this point, Tony Bennett is 80 years old. Tony Bennett's shirt is open down to here, and there's dozens of gold chains around. There are 8 fingers and 2 thumbs. Only the thumbs don't have rings on. And I said, Tony, we're going to have a great time touring for the next couple of days. Now, in what book is it that this is inconspicuous? and it was just, that's the way I am. That's the way I am. So it was wonderful. We toured around. One of the very first stop we made was going down. We went through Penticton, stopped at the little coffee shop going up the hill on the way to Naramata. And I said, let's go in and we'll have some coffees, an espresso if you like, or Americano, whatever. And no, we can't do that because I'm going to be mobbed. It's going to be terrible. There's going to be all this going on. Trust me, we're Canadians. You're in Canada. It'll be okay. It'll be okay. So sure enough, we went in and everything was fine. A few people did recognize him. They came over, asked for autographs. He made a little bit of an issue about that, but the reality was it served his ego great, and it felt like, oh, good, they know me, and I can sign. And so he signed his autograph. And we had a great time touring around. So I have a lot of fond memories with my 10 years with Mark Anthony Group and the wonderful people that I met there. Through all of that, and the work that I did at Workers' Comp and turning it around, I developed a lot of skill around corporate culture and corporate development and corporate growth. And I never really stepped away from that. As much as I left government as a public servant, I did and continue to consult with numerous government departments, both in the US, Canada, and in various countries in Europe, on corporate culture and corporate change and how to take and do that. So I very much enjoy that. And I took on the responsibility of Vice President of Truesome Visions and Vice President of Envision U, both of which are American companies and affiliated. Now, Truesome Visions is all about corporate culture and corporate development and just how do you take a corporation, your organization, from where it is to where it needs to be. And there are some great examples around that. Apple, Google, and I could tell lots of stories and talk lots about those kinds of organizations and the work, having done work in those, as well as financial institutions. And I really enjoyed that work. I'm mindful of the hand signal. So really, the takeaway for me from whether we're talking about Pink Martini, or Tom Cochrane, or Tony Bennett, or the Mark Anthony Group, or workers' compensation, occupational health and safety, or my previous career as a CEO, president, and deputy minister, or director of corrections and law enforcement, is that at the end of the day, and this is true for each of us sitting in this room, at the end of the day, it all comes down to identity. And what identity do you hold for yourself? And do you allow your identity to evolve? And I would dare say, without thinking of anybody in particular in the room, or in Kelowna, or in Canada, or in North America, or on and on and on, we tend to hold our identities as something concrete. This is who I am. And that will do nothing but hold us back. Because our identity, personally, corporately, culturally, socially, always needs to be something that's evolving in order for us to move forward. Statistically, you have between 40 and 60,000 thoughts a day. Now you might not realize that, but it's true. You have 40 to 60,000 thoughts a day. Those thoughts are stories that you tell yourself about who you are, what you know, whether you're right, whether you're wrong, whether you're worthy, whether you have great self-esteem, whether you have no self-esteem. Just think of the whole spectrum of what it means to be a human being. Those 40 to 60,000 thoughts are the stories that you tell yourself, and they're habitual stories. What that means is it's the same story you tell yourself over and over and over. And if we're going to evolve as a person, as a corporation, as a club, as a nation, as a province, pick the association you would like to have. If we're going to evolve, and we need to evolve, because history is full of cultures and organizations and businesses and people that did not evolve and fell to the wayside. And we have some amazing ones. The Roman Empire, right? We owe a lot to the Roman Empire. The Greek Empire. We owe democracy to the Greek Empire. But what drives us is our identity. And what drives our identity is our beliefs. Our beliefs drive our behaviors, and our behaviors drive our habits. And 99% of what you do in this room, you do by habit. How you put your pants on, how you put your shoes on, how you brush your teeth, what your morning routine looks like, what you eat for lunch, the people you associate with, the stories you tell yourself are all habit. And you have a choice of whether you accept those habits if they're moving you forward, and arguably they aren't, or whether you choose to change those habits. Get clear on what is it that I want. And this isn't an age-specific thing. I realize that we're not talking to a lot of 20 and 19-year-olds right at this moment. But it doesn't matter, because what we want in life isn't age-specific. We can change what we want in life at any point. And the first thing, once we decide what it is I want in my life, the question you have to ask yourself is, who do I need to be to have that? And then start acting accordingly. Believe that that's who you need to be. Act accordingly. That will drive your beliefs will drive your behaviors, and you will change your habits. Now there's a little bit of work involved in all of that, and I made that sound like it's really simple, but it is straightforward, and it's possible for all of us to take and do that. And so I think the challenge for us, under our fine leadership here that Justin's giving us for this club, is to identify clearly what identity do we want as a club, who do we want to be, what do we want to stand for, and how are we going to accomplish that? Once we get clear on what that vision is and the identity we want for this club, then we need to hold on strong to the beliefs that we can do that. This club has done amazing things. Rotary has done amazing things. We want to grab hold of that, have our behaviors match that in our meetings, outside of our meetings, and develop the habits that drive real success for our club and drive real success for us as an individual. So I know that was supposed to be a classification talk. I'm not sure what a classification talk is. So I just kind of rambled around, and I hope there was some value and some interest there.